Welcome to Preparing for the Unexpected. Today I'm talking with Regina Phelps, and we are going to talk about, Regina, I'm not sure if we've talked about this before. The ongoing Iran-US war?
Oh,
On
sometimes
again,
I
off
think it's
again
more
war?
like the US-Iran war, right? I don't know. I think that might be a good place for us to start. We actually have talked about it off and on in the 4 months it's been happening, but my goodness, things are a little up and down, aren't they?
Very much so. Usually things are changing. Well, recently things have been changing uh, within 24 hours.
Yes, it's on and
Start the day
off.
off one way, end the day another, and circle back, start again.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. And I think when you look at what we do for a living and you look at our job as planning, oh great. How do you plan when there is no concrete information, when there is no clear path of where we're going or when that might happen? And I think, frankly, this could go on for a long time because if Trump's desire is that we're going to have certain um, achievements happening in this war. One is, of course, the nuclear weapon related issue and the generation of nuclear material in Iran. If that's the deal breaker, this could go on for a very long time. Because if indeed he wants to restrict his ability to, or their ability to produce nuclear power, for example, or generate nuclear material, that's the deal stopper. And so I am, and at one point not too long ago, he was saying like, oh, well, it'd be okay if they, well, it was 2 days ago, I think he said it'd be okay if they actually could generate their own nuclear material. It's okay if they have ballistic missiles because, I mean, all their friends around them have ballistic missiles, so they should have ballistic missiles. And so I heard that and I just thought, oh my God.
Yeah, that was a silly one. If I still remember my mom saying things, well, if your friends jumped off a bridge, does that mean you do it too?
Yeah.
You know, that's exactly what I was thinking when I heard that
Yes.
comment.
Yeah, I was sort of shocked. So I think what that means is that, in my estimation, this is going to go on for a long time. And and we know, and in particular, the other thing that Iran has learned, thanks to President Trump, is that the Strait of Hormuz can be turned off and on. And so, what does that mean for all of us who are in the world of planning? That means that if you're dependent on any materials that come out of the Strait of Hormuz, oil, gas, liquefied natural gas, fertilizer, a bunch of chemicals like helium and other things that come out of that strait, that means that you have to be thinking about either having additional storage of materials all the time, just in case, or you have to try and find other sources for some of that material, which I'm assuming most people have done by now. But I think from a planning perspective, I think all bets are off because Iran has learned a valuable lesson in this incredible debacle that has happened called the Iran War. And that is that they can really impact the global economy and the entire global supply chain on many, many, many critical items. So, what does that say about our planning? What do we have to think about then? What do you think?
Well, that was one of the things that I was kind of mentioning before we started recording is how can you really come up with any long-term plan when
Hmm.
things are changing so fast daily and sometimes it feels hourly? And you you can only go to so many alternate suppliers
Right,
because let's say you have one that is coming from the Strait of Hormuz, they're using stuff that comes through there. Okay, you find somebody else or an alternate for a temporary alternate, but then they may also have stuff coming through the Strait of Hormuz because it's up to
right,
25 to 30% or something goes through there, somewhere around there, goes through the strait. So the chances are your alternate supplier or partner that you're finding is going to be impacted the same way.
right.
So, and you mentioned stockpiling as well. So does that mean our just-in-time inventory stuff now is down the tubes? We're going to stockpile everything, and when we stockpile, we end up with other issues that
Right.
occur.
Right.
So it's, I think any kind of long-term planning is out the window right now. Everyone has to be short-term, and you've got to be able to pivot and be agile almost immediately. But you
Right.
get to a point where you can't keep up with the change.
Right. Right. Yeah, it's cascading. It's constantly changing, and there's no rhyme or reason to any of it. And so, what do we do for a living? We're planners, right? So then what do you plan when that's the basic premise? And so I think from a perspective of the organizations that our colleagues work with, they're going to have to really do some kind of deep soul searching, which I am sure they have been doing for the last 4 months, really looking at both plans and processes, but also really engaging executives and really trying to understand, looking up at the leadership of an organization, like, I mean, they're the ones that are going to be making the big decisions, right? About stockpiling, spending money, doing whatever. And part of that is really having some seat at the table when possible when those conversations are being had. So I'm assuming that maybe now that people are starting to think that this isn't going to resolve very quickly.
Mhm.
And that means like executives and executive teams must be having these conversations now. And the question is, how can we, both from a crisis management perspective, a business continuity perspective, be more, as your doggy, be
That's what you
more
guys are here.
yeah. Yeah, to make a show, right? So how can we be more present for these kind of conversations? Because we are going to be carrying some of the water, if you will, for both strategic planning and also recovery related issues. So I wonder if any of our clients or any of our colleagues are doing that, thinking about how we can be in those conversations when they're happening. And if we're not, how we could get there. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, I wanted to add to kind of what you were saying is that if leaderships do decide to, let's say, stockpile,
Mhm.
depending on what industry they're in, if they're able to do that,
Right.
then that starts changing current lines of business or opening up new lines of business and has impact now on logistics. If it's an oil
Housing.
company, now we need trucks, now we need a facility to hold all of this, and that opens up the current organization to new and different risks
Right.
and needing new contingencies, which means we have to expand our incident management capabilities and our BCPs and our BIAs and our testing. And to be a part of those discussions would be important because it could, in some instances, organizations could be changing the way they are set up
Yes,
and
completely.
what they do. They may even, because of what's going on, they can't keep up with things. It's not worth it anymore. Drop this whole line of business.
Right.
We've
Right.
had that happen.
Right. Right. And I think even though people may at the executive level may not think that resiliency needs to be part of those conversations, they need to be at least in those loops. Because if things get added or changed, and then the issue is, well, what is the recoverability of what we just added? If you, especially if you're not, if you, it's a partnership or you don't own the building or, or whatever it is, what are we doing to make sure that we can still recover those assets if necessary and or plan appropriately? Because maybe what happens is that maybe your backup solution that's already documented is now your primary solution and
Yeah.
you don't have a backup anymore. So I think those kind of conversations are going to be important because I think if anything we've learned since the Iran war started is that you can think you had nailed this all down and you probably haven't.
Yeah. Which is why
Right.
it's important if you don't have a champion or supporter, sponsor,
Executive sponsor, yep.
get one now
Yes.
because what's happening on this side of the world is going to have an impact on you. Your organization could change, especially if you're a large organization. They change all the time and you have to keep pace with that. Well, now the change is happening faster than an organization can keep pace with. So
Right.
bigger
Right.
decisions are going to get made, strategic ones, which is going to have an impact on your operations, and it's going to impact all your resilience um, capabilities one way or another. And as you say, things that were a contingency or a backup could become primary, or
Right,
depending on decision made, could no longer exist. And you're left with, we have nothing in place now.
right. And I bet that that's actually happened in a lot of places now, based on the fact that they might have lost their primary source that was happening essentially from behind the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah.
So I think this is really an opportunity for us to ask our colleagues to sort of step back and really make a deep assessment from a continuity perspective, kind of where we are. Because I think it would be really important or helpful for continuity professionals to be having some conversations with leadership. And a lot of our colleagues don't necessarily deal with the most senior people in a company, but where can they start to plug in to raise these concerns? Because perhaps people at those different levels aren't necessarily thinking like this
Mhm.
because they're not looking about through the resiliency lens that we do. And so I think this is a great opportunity for us to say, okay, great. These are my concerns. Where are these conversations happening now? And then begin to escalate that, if you will, up the food chain. And if you have an executive sponsor, and I hope you do, that you would actually be able to have those kind of conversations with them right now, because you're probably using your backup, and which means you don't have one. And if this goes on for much longer, is that all going to change? And if so, kind of what's the strategy for that? And are they thinking about a backup to the backup since now the backup is the primary? If
Yeah.
that all makes sense.
Or are they just going forward with their fingers crossed saying it'll all get back to normal? Normal,
Right. And
no
I
such
bet
thing as normal.
I bet that's what they're doing because they thought that, it was supposed to resolve a month ago or 2 months ago or 3 months ago, and it hasn't. And I mean, the Iranians are very smart. They are very cunning and they are very good negotiators. And they're very clear about what their end goal is. And they're willing to suffer to get there.
Mhm.
Now, that makes them much more dangerous. A lot of countries aren't willing to suffer, if you will, to get what they want. And they have basically put the world over a barrel. I mean, that's the worst thing that is going to be the outcome of this entire war is that Iran learned that they could turn off the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. I would
And
be
I don't know how
interested.
that's going to change anytime
Yeah.
soon.
Yeah, I don't think so either. And even if it does, something else could be triggered where can turn around and do the same thing.
Right, right, right. I totally agree. I totally
Yeah.
agree. And so
I'd
I
be,
think,
go ahead.
no, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I'd be interested in hearing what's from our tactical people at the operational level, what they're doing or suggestions that they have or doing right now to get those messages up. But I'd also be interested in hearing from the strategic level, the executives, what they're thinking about with how this is so ongoing, which is supposed to have been over many
Right,
times, but is
right.
still ongoing. Are they changing their uh, thinking of resilience? Are they changing their business plans? Are they changing their outlooks? We're not doing 5-year plans anymore because we can't even see beyond 5 days.
Right.
So I'd be interested to hear from both.
Mhm, mhm. I would too. And I have to think that, the path of least resistance is where probably most people are. And the path of least resistance is where you're thinking, well, it's going to get over soon. And
Yeah.
I would imagine that many companies have been playing that record now for 4 months. It's going to be over pretty soon. It's going to be over pretty soon. And even though it's 4 months later, I think they're still kind of doing that. And I think from really raising it from using the risk register, for example, as a good idea of how they could say, okay, let's do a risk assessment right now based on our impacts on supply chain related issues. Let's redo our risk assessment. And let's look at that in relationship to our vendor selections for these particular items that we use. I'd be very curious if many organizations have done that. And I'm kind of thinking they did a kind of a band-aid approach, maybe by having the secondary person or source brought up And then as we were saying earlier, I bet there's no tertiary person that's there or a backup to that. And so I think maybe the first way to have the conversation is let's look at the risk register based on where we get our materials and ask, where are we now with that?
And to stay on the risk register, and if the current situation is having any impact on other risks that we have as well. Are
Absolutely.
are some of these risks that we thought, yeah, they're on the enterprise risk level, so register, so they are important, but is something that was maybe at the very bottom, has that started to creep up
Right,
because
exactly.
of 4 months of going by of this and having
Yeah,
that? Because if that's going on, then it's almost 100%, I'll say, that I doubt the operational response plans and continuity plans, etc., are keeping pace with that change.
100%. 100%. Yeah, there's a destabilizing, it's kind of like when you take a matchbooks and you sort of build a little castle and you start taking them out at the bottom and kind of all of a sudden like, oh, it's very much like that. And I think I would seriously doubt if anybody that my client population, I'm sort of going through company names. I wonder if they've actually really done a really thorough assessment related to that
Yeah,
as far as the actual impacts, thinking again that it would go away pretty soon. And so we don't need to actually go through there and actually do another risk assessment and really seriously look at other vendors who might be able to supply whatever we're missing or needing. So I
right.
think that would be something to really raise through again, and so if you don't have an executive sponsor, what are the ways you might be able to do that within an organization? You know, I'm just going to throw things out. Is there a risk committee or is there a committee that actually oversees, maybe it's audit that you engage? Who's going to help you carry the water in a meaningful way? I would think audit would be very helpful. I would think certainly risk management and insurance could be very helpful. Maybe people's insurance rates have gone up because their vendors have changed or because they have more difficulty in actually being able to procure things. So I think that would be really interesting to engage a conversation with the risk professionals in the company. And if you're not in risk, it would be great for you then to buddy up with them to be able to find out what's going on there and be able to have that conversation and see if you could jointly push this up the food chain.